All right, let's try this again. Take two. I'm still house sitting, so I'm dealing with a slew of technical issues, not being used to this particular setup. But welcome to the No One Asked You podcast. This is the In the Bag Book Accountability Group. I hope everyone's been able to read quite a lot this week, or at least as much as they are interested in and able to. Where last we left off, I finished Dune. Still very fond of the book, still reeling from so many things. Since then, I watched a bunch of Alt Shift X and Alt Swift X videos about Dune and absorbing the lore. I'm not going to run into reading, or rather jump into reading the subsequent books at this time. I've got some other things on my backlog, but I'm really appreciating the world and the lore, and I'm not terribly concerned with Dune for spoilers for future books. It's enough that I'm enjoying that journey as it is. But I did manage to dig into the Aeneid this week. I made it 2 books in. I don't think it's correct to call them chapters. It's a 12-book poem. Anyway, I'm enjoying it. So I'll go through my story notes and then presumably talk a little bit about the experience going in, but or as I go through it. But I will say one of the big reasons I picked this up is because I have a unique interest in early Rome, the Roman regal period, the founding of Rome, more the mythological elements. Everyone knows about the Republic and the fall of the Republic. Everyone knows about the Empire. I'm really interested in the very early stuff. So I thought I would pick this up, see. I suppose I'm looking for. I don't even really know how to articulate it. Just the way they speak, the things they do, how they interact with one another. So the book starts with essentially the fall of Troy, the end of the Trojan War. Juno, the queen of the gods, is mad. Essentially, I think between the Iliad and the Odyssey, I think it was Paris had slighted one of the gods, or 2 out of 3 gods. There were like 3 gods, and they asked who's the prettiest, and that set off the chain of events that led to the Trojan War. Juno is very upset about the slight to her beauty. She's mad that some of the Trojans, primarily Aeneas, survived the fall of Troy, and she wants to interfere with Aeneas and his destiny to found Rome. So she bribes someone called Aeolus, who is a hermit wizard guy who commands the winds. She goes to him and says, "Hey, I'll give you a pretty wife, a nymph of your choosing, if you use your wind power to create a bunch of storms and sink Aeneas's ships." So he does that, and there's essentially a storm. Aeneas has a fleet. He gets separated from a big portion of it. And I would say this far in, I am enjoying the poetry of the book. It's not quite as difficult to follow as I had initially been concerned it might be. I would say one of the most difficult things for me getting into it is keeping track of all the names and who's who, and not just the names, but the fact that several characters seem to have multiple names uh, can make it a little bit difficult to track. When I first started, I was basically stopping every couple of paragraphs to do a quick Google search. Okay, who's Ascanius again? Okay, who's Aeolus again? Um, which god was Juno? Which god of the Greek gods was Juno? That kind of thing. And that was a little bit tough in the beginning, but the more I immersed myself in the world and the more I saw the names, the easier it became for me to recognize who was who. Um, I would say that it's also a little bit difficult for me to make a distinction between when something is a metaphor and when something is literally happening. A bit later on in the story, there's a character who's bitten by snakes, and I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be as well, as I just said, a metaphor, or if it literally happened. Which is, but again, it's one of those things where once I keep reading on and I understand the full passage, I have a better idea going back and rereading a segment of what's going on. So that has not been terribly difficult. Um, I would also say that the dialogue when characters speak to each other is probably my favorite part, and the easiest for me to understand. Um, okay, this character is saying this, he wants this, he's trying to get this. Uh, that is enjoyable, and I like the way they speak. I see the poetry in it. So, Aeolus is messing with the winds to try and create a storm, and then Neptune says, whoa, 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 hold on a second. I did not say you could do that. This is my domain. How dare you? Also, Neptune is top tier deity. Very fond of him. Hades and Poseidon. Uh, so excited to see Neptune here. Neptune calms the oceans. But as I mentioned, Aeneas has been parted from the bulk of his fleet. And he and his remaining sailors wash up on an African shore or in a bay of some kind. And they get settled, and Aeneas and Achates, I'm never going to get all of these names pronounced correctly. Achates go out hunting and exploring. Venus, who is Aeneas's mother, goes to Jupiter and expresses concern about her son's fate. She's worried it has changed, Aeneas's fate being that of being Rome's founder. Or not really, that's Romulus. To Aeneas's fate to settle in Rome or Hesperia, I think, and father a line of Alban kings who will eventually found Rome. But Jupiter insists that his fate has not changed. So Aeneas and Achates are out hunting and exploring, and they're visited by Venus in disguise. She's disguised as a relatively young girl, I think, with a bow. And she tells them about Carthage and its queen, Dido, and that they'll find the rest of their ships and sailors there. She hides them in mist or fog. She casts invisibility on them, essentially, and sends them on their way to Carthage, which is a new city. And there's a little bit of drama about how Carthage is founded. My understanding is Dido was set to marry the king of an African city, and then Dido's brother killed the husband and took control, and Dido stole the city's wealth, fled, and then founded Carthage. Something to that effect. Do please fact check me on some of the finer points of those details. Aeneas and Achates sneak into Carthage. In the temple of Juno, Aeneas sees images of the Trojan War, and she sees Dido welcoming the rest of his fleet. So Aeneas reveals himself, and Dido welcomes him. She's very fond. Everyone knows about the Trojan War. Everyone wants to hear about it. He's basically a celebrity. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, Venus swaps out Aeneas's son Ascanius for Cupid. And Venus tells Cupid, hey, I'm worried about Juno, so make sure Dido falls in love with Aeneas, as insurance to make sure everything goes smoothly. And Dido, enamored with Aeneas, asks to hear the story of Troy. And I believe that's where book 1 ends. So book 2 is essentially Aeneas recounting his experience at the fall of Troy. He explains how the Greeks seemingly sailed away with their fleet, leaving a giant wooden horse, the famous Trojan horse, and Laocoon, a priest, throws a spear at the horse, claiming it'll bring destruction. Then a Greek prisoner named Sinon, or a Greek slave, says it's an offering to Athena. And then some serpents appear and kill Laocoon right on the spot. And I hear sirens. I don't know if you hear sirens because I have noise cancellation on. Anyway, totally distracted me. Laocoon is bitten by snakes, and the Trojans take it as a sign that Laocoon was wrong. So they take the horse in and they set it up at one of the temples. That night, the Greeks attack the city, and Aeneas fights his way to the palace just in time to witness the death of Priam, which is very sad. In most iterations, movie iterations, or series iterations I've seen of the Trojan War, I'm always fond of Priam. He seems like a nice guy. And then there's a portion, and then there was an asterisk along with the portion that referred me back to the introduction, that basically asserted that there's some reason to question this specific passage, but I guess Aeneas sees Helen and he's overcome with anger and what have you. He strongly considers killing her in vengeance for what she wrought upon Troy, but he decides not to kill her. Aeneas makes his way to his father, wife, and son, and it's my understanding going into this that Aeneas is supposed to be a character who exemplifies all of the Roman virtues, one of those big virtues being one's relationship with the father and honoring the father. And I guess this is an important example of that. On his way to his father, wife, and son, Aeneas's mother, Venus, appears to him, warning him to flee the city. Anchises, who is Aeneas's father, refuses to leave, but after a warning sign of a falling star, he agrees to leave, and Aeneas literally carries his father on his shoulders and takes his son in his hand and flees the city with his wife Creusa following behind. But on their way out of the city, Creusa is separated from them, and Aeneas returns to the city to find her. He does not, but her ghost tells him to leave and that he'll find a new wife in Hesperia, which I think is Italy. Pretty sure it's Italy. And that's as far as I got. I believe that's the end of book 2. I'm enjoying it. It's easier to read than I had been worried it might be. And I appreciate the poetry of it. Again, I have a little bit of trouble sometimes distinguishing between what is poetic metaphor versus what is actually happening, particularly with regard to some of the more mystical elements of the story. But I'm enjoying it, and I can't wait to get 2 more, particularly the second half. I think it's around book 6 or so out of 12 where they actually do finally get to Italy. So that'll be exciting. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks. Bye.